They brought Vexar down in a reinforced stasis cube the size of a bus, escorted by 3 orbital patrols, a drone swarm, and one very nervous intern with a clipboard. It landed in the middle of The Hague, or what used to be The Hague, now retrofitted into a sprawling, neon-lit legal fortress called the International Earth Tribunal for Non-Human Affairs. Humans called it the ITNA. The Vexar called it an insult made of concrete and hubris. The world watched. Every screen, every feed, every social stream. From Antarctic base camps to floating archaeology towers in New Mumbai, billions tuned in to see the thing that had haunted their nightmares for nearly a decade. Vexar, warlord of the 8th Spiral, responsible for the Carter Massacre, the Skyrift Siege, and that time he called Earth a species of overcaffeinated bacteria. No, he was in chains. They weren't traditional shackles. More like a humming gravitic suppression field that made every molecule of his 12-foot frame regret its choices. And yet, he stood tall. Eyes like burning glass. Armor scorched and dinted. Mouth curled in permanent disdain. To him, this wasn't justice. It was theater. And humans? Oh, we delivered. The second he stepped off the ship, a reporter in a floating mech suit yelled, "Vexar, is it true you ate a judge on Galver 6? To which Vexar replied, with perfect pronunciation, "Only the smug ones." It trended for 12 hours. The council, of course, lost its collective mind. Official channels declared the trial illegitimate, provocative, and a primitive stunt designed to insult the rule of galactic law. Earth's response? One sentence. He hurt our people. He stands trial here. Legally speaking, Earth had every right. The war was over. Vexar had been captured by an Earth strike team on neutral ground. Sovereign jurisdiction, Planetary Charter Clause 14C. Diplomatically speaking, it was like punching a black hole and calling it closure. Still, it was happening. Judges were appointed. Human ones. Jury pool selected. 12 citizens of Earth, with backgrounds ranging from law professors to a chicken farmer who once sued a tech company for emotionally manipulating his rooster. Defense team? Alien. Imported under protest. Prosecution? Human. Led by a former war crimes investigator turned podcast host. The entire planet buzzed with anticipation. Protests surged across cities, some demanding mercy, others calling for live execution by volcano. A bakery in Toronto released Vexar verdict, cupcakes shaped like tiny gavel hammers. One teenager made a fan cam of the war criminal and got 2.4 million views in 3 hours. It was surreal. It was chaotic. And it was only day one. As the tribunal doors sealed behind him, Vexar turned once to the cameras and said, "You believe your laws can hold me. I will make your justice kneel." He said it with the calm of a god. But somewhere, deep in the courtroom halls of Earth, a human judge in cracked reading glasses raised an eyebrow and whispered, "Let's find out." The courtroom looked like a spaceship had crashed into a law library. Polished wood benches stood beneath force field barriers. There were potted plants, jury seats with built-in biometric de-stressors, and a hovering coffee drone for the judge. The ceiling projected stars. Because, as the lead architect said, justice should feel cosmic. At the center sat Vexar, unmoving, unchained, not because he was trusted, but because no one wanted to see what would happen if they tried. To his left, the alien defense team, a delegation from the council, dressed in diplomatic armor and confusion. To his right, Earth's prosecution, led by Rita Halvorsen, a former war crimes investigator turned folk hero who once punched a cyborg lawyer in the middle of a trial and got a standing ovation. She was wearing a blood-red blazer, because subtlety is for treaties. The judge, a wiry man named Judge Benson, tapped his stylus against a smart gavel and said, "Prosecution may begin. Try to keep it civil." For once, Rita stood, flicked open her hollow brief, and began. "Ladies, gentlemen, and non-corporeal sapients of the jury, this is not a case about war. This is a case about choice. About a being who could have shown mercy and didn't. Who had a galaxy of options and chose carnage." A hologram snapped to life beside her, showing images from the Carter Massacre, burning fields, crumpled habitats, names. She didn't flinch. You will hear stories from survivors. You will see evidence beyond question. And when we're done, you'll understand that Earth didn't put Vexar on trial because we're angry. We put him on trial because we're still human. Applause started to ripple, then Judge Benson growled, "Anyone claps again, I hold your DNA in contempt. Then came the defense, led by a four-eyed linguist from Dalvos Prime named Surekton, who had spent the last 72 hours trying to understand what emotional damage meant in legal terms. Surek rose slowly and began in a crisp, translated monotone. The accused acted under military doctrine recognized by the Confederation. Furthermore, your species' legal framework is, how do you say, vibe-based chaos wrapped in metaphor. He gestured at a stack of printed memes entered as evidence. My client is not bound by your jurisdiction, your symbols, or your obsession with televised morality rituals. Vexar smirked. He hadn't said a word until now, but suddenly he stood, all 12 feet of him. I do not acknowledge this court. I acknowledge only conquest. And you, little mammals, sit in judgment of a storm. The courtroom fell silent, until juror number 6, an elderly woman named Mabel, whispered, "Storms pass, sweetheart." Rita smiled. The counsel glared. Judge Benson sipped his coffee drone and said, "Opening arguments are concluded. May the madness proceed." And with that, the trial of Vexar, the warlord, the symbol, the storm, began. In a courtroom that ran on caffeine, contradictions, and just maybe justice. At precisely 9:03 Earth Standard Time, the Galactic Council lost its collective composure. Representatives from over 47 star systems sat clustered in the Grand Observation Chamber of Council World Prime, surrounded by curved holographic displays beaming the trial of Vexar in crystal clear, stomach-turning resolution. A human court, with a jury, and applause. Counselor Vorthenike of the Jalari species, a floating orb of translucent nerves and anxiety, spasmed visibly as the human judge banged something called a gavel to silence the courtroom. "Is that what?" Vorthenike whispered, horrified. Counselor Zianara of the Graal Collective leaned closer to her translator drone. They selected 12 completely unqualified civilians to determine the fate of a war criminal. Randomly, hissed her aide, with snacks provided. And then came the moment that would be memed across 7 systems. Juror number 9, a man named Donnie who listed his profession as freelance opinion haver, objected to the alien defense team's argument from the jury box, and was not removed. The council ambassador to Earth, a by-the-book lizardoid named Ambassador Hract, stood up from his official council seat mid-trial and demanded a halt to proceedings. He attempted to project a formal diplomatic override onto the feed. The override was blocked by a pop-up that read, "This content is being protected under Earth Judicial Transparency Act. Please enjoy the show." Ambassador Hract made a sound somewhere between a hiss and a scream and declared Earth's judicial system to be a violent improv theater run by caffeinated philosophers. He wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, humans debated everything from Vexar's tactical decisions to whether his glowing chest emblem violated courtroom dress code. The council's legal scholars watched in horror as Earth's prosecution used animated timelines to illustrate war crimes, complete with ominous music and dramatic voiceovers. At one point, a legal assistant slapped a sticker on a diagram labeled Guilt Zone. Back on Council World, a legal historian fainted. "They are weaponizing performance," a Xandari archivist muttered. "It's not even about evidence anymore," her colleague whispered. "It's about storytelling." But here was the real nightmare. It was working. Humanity, for all its absurdity, was reaching its people. Survivors, civilians, even disillusioned soldiers from the war tuned in not for vengeance, but for meaning, for a sense that someone, somewhere, was being held accountable. Even if that someone was 900 pounds of armored alien fury with no respect for theater. Ambassador Hract stormed out of the viewing chamber and called for an emergency council vote to end the broadcast. He was denied, by a narrow margin. The reason? Counselors from the outer systems were watching the trial too. And privately, they were fascinated. Because deep down, no matter how alien they were, there was something strangely beautiful about how humans handled justice. Messy, loud, illogical, but honest. As Vexar snarled his way through the day's testimony, one young counselor quietly whispered, "What if they're not chaotic? What if they're just brave?" No one answered, because the next witness was taking the stand, and even stars held their breath. And just when the council thought they'd seen the worst, the jury antics, the objections shouted like war chants, The prosecution quoting legal precedent from a Reddit thread, the humans moved to their next act. They called the survivors. The courtroom, which had been a chaotic mix of snark and spectacle, fell into a heavy hush. This wasn't theater anymore. This was memory turned sharp. The first to take the stand was Mira Tanaka, 32, civil engineer, survivor of Carter Outpost Delta, Site B. She walked with a cane and eyes that had seen too much and blinked too little. When she spoke, her voice was soft, not because she lacked strength, but because pain doesn't need volume. She described the day the sky screamed, how the lights turned red before the alarms did, how her brother tried to shield her from a collapsing roof with a dinner tray, how she woke up buried beneath 3 meters of ash and alloy, listening to the last message on her mother's comm, "Don't be afraid. Just run." Council delegates watching from orbit demanded the testimony be struck from the record. "This is not evidence, it is emotional manipulation," one snapped. To which the human judge, in a rare moment of venom, responded, "This is why we're here." And still Vexar said nothing. Second came Jalen Voss, a former comms officer, who spent 17 hours trapped in a structural collapse alongside 3 cadets. He was the only one who made it out. His face was badly scarred. His voice, however, was precise, reciting troop positions, radio blackouts, and the exact time the Vexary sonic blades breached the perimeter. But in between the tactical details were human moments that statistics couldn't carry. He talked about how one of the cadets kept whispering knock-knock jokes until she stopped breathing. He recited the last one. No one laughed. Everyone remembered it. Third came an old man with no rank or role, just a worker who maintained solar panels on the outer ring. He hadn't fought. He hadn't fled. He just watched. As the attack unfolded, he held the hand of his wife, who couldn't move fast enough. And when she died, he kept holding it, because no one came for 6 days. And the whole time, Vexar sat in his containment field, still, unreadable, a statue carved from war and silence. Not flinching, not blinking, just watching. Not like a predator ready to pounce. No, worse. Like a historian watching a familiar story play out again. By the end of the testimonies, the jury looked shaken. The audience outside was weeping or raging. And the council's feed? Static. Some systems simply couldn't process the rawness of human grief compressed into legal form. Earth called it testimony. The council called it chaos. But one thing was becoming clear. This trial wasn't about the law anymore. It was about what pain looked like when it demanded to be seen. Suraktun adjusted his translator collar with the slow, deliberate dignity of someone trying not to scream into the void. He had once argued before the Confederation Supreme Tribunal. He had defended black hole smugglers, time loop tax evaders, and one sentient fungus charged with impersonating a priest. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare him for Earth's legal system. Still, he stood before the jury with a posture of grim professionalism and began. "Honored humans, and Donnie." Donnie saluted with a bag of chips in hand. Surek pressed on. "We assert that my client, Vexar of the 8th Spiral, acted in accordance with the lawful military protocols of the Confederation conflict mandate. He did not initiate the war. He was assigned to it." He gestured to a hollow projection of Earth's early encounters, border breaches, resource skirmishes, and one very unfortunate incident involving a diplomatic envoy and a karaoke machine. Earth was not a victim. It was a provocation. A culture expanding faster than it understood. Vexar followed orders from a superior chain of command, the same way your own armies have done for millennia. He swiped again. Now came the images. Wars. Bombings. Civil collapses. Entire chapters from Earth's own past, bloody and undeniable. Do not pretend to be strangers to conquest. You invented the term total war. Your own species' legal code contains over 400 definitions of acceptable destruction. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even Judge Benson leaned back, arms crossed. Surek saw the hesitation, the flicker of shame, and went for the kill. If Vexar is guilty for obeying orders during a conflict Earth helped escalate, then you must also try your own generals, your own politicians. Your history condemns you. Silence. Then, Rita Halvorsen, Earth's prosecutor, stood with a faint smile. "May I respond?" Judge Benson waved her forward. She approached the jury with nothing but her data pad and a mish. Donnie burst out laughing. Mabel snorted. Even Judge Benson gave a half-smile. But Rita wasn't done. Yes, Vexar followed orders. So did every monster in history who hid behind protocol. But Earth law doesn't care where the command came from. It cares who chose to pull the trigger. And Vexar didn't just follow orders. She swiped through images, civilian deaths, gleeful transmissions, footage of Vexar personally leading orbital strikes. He enjoyed it. She turned to the jury. And that makes him more than a soldier. It makes him responsible. Vexar didn't flinch. But he watched her now, more closely. Surekdun sat down slowly, rubbing his temples with all four hands. The humans hadn't just countered his logic. They'd outperformed it. And the trial marched on. With truth, guilt, and a surprising amount of memes. The jury was never meant to become famous. They were supposed to sit quietly, absorb facts, then render a verdict. That's how it worked in theory. But Earth doesn't do theory. By day 4 of the trial, juror number 4, real name Danny Velasquez, online handle @TruthSnack, had amassed over 3.2 million followers on her live blog, Justice from the Box. She posted updates between sessions. Day 2. Y'all? Vexar just stared at the judge for 18 straight minutes. No blinking. I think he's telepathically trying to win. Day 3. Defense lawyer brought up the Geneva Conventions. Judge asked if they were on the witness list. She wasn't leaking classified details, just commentary, hashtags, and existential spirals. Her most viral post? A picture of her courtroom lunch tray with the caption, "What do you eat while deciding if a genocidal alien deserves mercy?" Apparently, a burrito. Meanwhile, inside the jury room, things were unraveling. Juror number 7, a retired philosophy professor named Claude, was trying to introduce Kantian ethics into every deliberation. Every single one. Can moral responsibility be assigned to a being who operates under an entirely alien value system? He asked, holding up a printout titled, War Crimes and the Moral Other. Mabel, juror number 6, sipped her tea and replied. He blew up a hospital, Claude. Ain't that universal enough for you? Then there was Donnie. Donnie had brought in a homemade Venn diagram labeled, Bad guy versus war hero versus victim of interstellar bureaucracy. He was very proud of it. Arguments flared. Some believed Vexar was irredeemable. Others said executing him made humans no better than the monsters they claimed to judge. One juror wanted to sentence him to life on Earth, working customer service. Outside the courtroom, the world watched, debated, and flamed comment sections into molten chaos. Universities hosted impromptu forums on alien culpability. Kids on playgrounds played judge and warlord. A band released a hit song called 12 Angry Species. The council, horrified, issued another statement condemning the mob rule disguised as jurisprudence. Earth's UN ambassador replied with a shrug in the now iconic line, "Have you met humans?" But under the memes and madness, something deeper stirred. The jurors weren't just bickering. They were wrestling with the kind of question that keeps civilizations awake. What is justice, when the rules were written by only one species? In a quiet moment, Claude removed his glasses and said, "Maybe we're not here to be right. Maybe we're here to decide what it means to try." Even Mabel paused at that. The deliberations would continue. The cameras would roll. And somewhere, behind his cold silver eyes, Vexar watched the chaos unfold. And smiled. Not out of amusement. Not out of confidence. But out of curiosity. Because for the first time in his long, brutal life, he wondered what they would choose. By now, the courtroom had become less of a legal chamber and more of an unstable reactor. The jury was in open revolt, philosophers quoting Nietzsche, teens reposting memes about justice with sparkle filters, and one grandmother refusing to deliberate until she finished knitting her Justice for Carter scarf. Diplomats trembled. Commentators screamed. And then, the doors opened for a witness no one had summoned. General Elias Bram. Retired. Decorated. The kind of man who saluted thunder and expected it to salute back. He hadn't been on the witness list. Hadn't been seen in public for years. But now he walked into the courtroom, slow, deliberate, with a stare like steel and a folder of classified regrets. "I'm here because truth shouldn't hide," he said, "especially when it's inconvenient." The prosecution tried to object. The defense blinked in disbelief. Even the judge hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed." Bram took the stand and recounted a memory buried under 12 layers of military secrecy. It was during the 4th month of the Carter campaign. Human forces had been cornered, outgunned, outnumbered, and cut off. Vexar's fleet surrounded the last base. And everyone, including Bram, expected annihilation. But instead of fire, there was silence. Then a message. Evacuate. You have 8 minutes. They did. And when they returned, the base still stood. Untouched. Untorched. Just abandoned. Why? The prosecutor asked, voice taut. Why would Vexar do that? Bram hesitated, then answered. I believe he showed mercy. The courtroom froze. Not the dramatic, theatrical freeze humans loved. No, this was real. Like someone had turned down the heat of war itself. Mercy. From the architect of the Carter Massacre. From the being who had turned colonies into ash and children into ghosts. The council delegation hissed in confusion. The defense perked up like cats sensing weakness in a dogfight. And Vexar? Vexar actually blinked. Not often. Just once. But for a creature bred for war, a blink could be a scream. The jury murmured. If he was capable of mercy, one whispered. What does that make him? A monster with a conscience? Or a soldier with no choice? The cross-examination began, but it was a mess. No one wanted clarity. They wanted certainty, and Bram couldn't give it. I don't know why he did it, Bram said. All I know is that he could have ended us. And he didn't. The philosopher juror wrote a blog post titled The Mercy Paradox. The teen juror made a poll. Should we forgive an alien warlord if he did one nice thing? 47 million votes flooded in. And outside, the world leaned in closer. Because this wasn't just about guilt anymore. It was about identity. About whether justice was a sword or a mirror. Vexar remained silent. But something had shifted. In the room, in the jury, maybe even in him. The trial wasn't just judging what he did. It was deciding what he was. The courthouse trembled, not from bombs or orbital fire, but from people. So many people. Protesters surrounded the tribunal walls, waving signs that said things like justice for Carter and due process means even for aliens. One particularly creative banner read, I came for the trial, stayed for the existential dread. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Diplomats paced. The council's envoy sat stone-faced. Vexar stood at his station, unchained, hands folded behind his back like this was a diplomatic luncheon and not his potential execution. Rita Halvorsen approached the bench one last time. No theatrics this time. No memes. No fire. Just truth. This isn't vengeance. If it were, we'd have already pulled the trigger. This is us telling the galaxy and ourselves that choice matters. That even monsters get a trial, because we refuse to become them. She nodded once. Stepped back. Suraktoon followed, his voice calm but laced with desperation. My client obeyed command structures codified by interstellar war law. This trial is performance. Theater cloaked as principle. If you execute Vexar, you make yourselves no different. Just slower. He sat. And for the first time, Vexar spoke without disdain. You wanted to see what I am. Now I want to see what you are. Then, silence. The jury disappeared into deliberation. Hours passed. News anchors filled the void with expert panels, reaction videos, and a cooking segment on verdict pudding. And then, the door opened. 12 humans walked out. Eyes sunken. Minds cracked open. Mabel clutched a tiny wooden charm. Claude looked like he'd aged a decade. Donnie was weeping quietly, muttering, he asked me about my blog. The foreman, juror number 2, a high school civics teacher, stood. In the matter of Vexar of the 8th Spiral, charged with war crimes against the people of Earth, we find the defendant. A million lungs stopped breathing. Even Vexar tilted his head. Guilty. But before the cheers could erupt, the foreman raised a hand. With recommendation for commuted sentence. Gasps. Confusion. Shouting. The council ambassador stood up, furious. Protesters outside smashed through security lines. The world held its breath. Judge Benson leaned forward. Explain. The foreman's voice shook. He is guilty, but we believe execution would make him a martyr. Instead, we sentence Vexar to permanent exile. As a living witness to our justice, he will teach, speak, be remembered, not as a warlord, but as a warning. Vexar blinked. For once, expressionless. Rita stared. Then, slowly, nodded. Suraktoon sat down, too stunned to speak. In the room, the planet, the galaxy changed. Because for all the mess and noise, humanity had chosen not to punish with fire, but with memory. And Vexar, killer of worlds, would now carry the weight of that memory forever. Not as a warrior, but as history. The verdict wasn't even an hour old when the ultimatum dropped. A shimmering column of blue light appeared in the middle of the courtroom, the kind of diplomatic hologram usually reserved for ceasefire declarations and last rites. The face of Counselor Zianara filled the chamber, cold and sharp as an asteroid blade. Earth's tribunal has 48 hours to reverse the sentence, she declared, or be considered in violation of Galactic Order 12.4. Hostility will be authorized. Translation: under your little stunt, or we bring the fleet. Judge Benson sipped his coffee and muttered. Always with the threats. Never with the subpoenas. The courtroom exploded, not physically, but diplomatically. Council envoys stood, demanding recess. Earth's delegation stood taller. Someone from the Martian Legal Council tried to file an emergency appeal. The defense team argued that exile was cruel and unusual punishment under interstellar law. Meanwhile, juror Donnie tried to sneak out the side door and got tackled by a very overworked bailiff. At the center of it all, Vexar sat still. No chains. No smirk. Just silence. Then Earth's UN ambassador, Lillian Cho, stepped forward. She was 5'2", soft-spoken, and had once told a Xandari general to take his treaty and sit on it sideways. She cleared her throat. Earth acknowledges the Council's concern. We also acknowledge our sovereignty. We held a fair trial. If you don't like the outcome, maybe next time, don't let your warlords rampage unchecked for a decade. Zianara's hologram flared. This verdict is an insult to every system that suffered under Vexar's reign. And yet, Lillian replied, we're the only ones who put him on trial. Mic dropped. Diplomatically, the Council threatened sanctions. Earth pointed out they already lived off solar, algae, and spite. The Council threatened military response. Earth reminded them that humanity had survived nukes, plagues, and Twitter. They would survive this too. Protesters outside were now hugging and arguing, and live-streaming reaction videos with titles like Alien Empire Tries to Cancel Justice. We respond. Inside the tribunal, the judge called for order. Didn't work. But points for effort. Finally, a new voice echoed. Let it stand. Everyone turned. It was Vexar. Not shouting. Not threatening. Just speaking. Let the verdict stand. If I am to be their symbol, so be it. If I am to walk among them, memory made flesh. Then let me walk. Counselor Zianara gaped. You accept this punishment? Vexar looked her dead in the eye. I accept that they won. Not with war. With law. And in that moment, the galaxy shifted. The Council didn't back down. Not officially. But the fleets never launched. The sanctions never arrived. Because one terrifying truth had settled in their minds. Humanity didn't need weapons to win. They had something far more dangerous. Principles. And the chaos to defend them. Vexar's sentence was supposed to be exile. Solitary. Stark. Symbolic. But Earth had never done anything by the book. Especially not a book written by a galactic bureaucracy that thought televised trials were barbaric. So when the Council tuned in for the official sentencing broadcast, they expected grim silence. What they got was a podium, a crowd, and Vexar, wearing a tailored Earth blazer, standing under a banner that read, Truth and Reconciliation, Humanity's Final Statement. He didn't look like a war criminal. He looked like a guest speaker at a graduation for civilization. And then the cameras rolled. Rita Halvorsen stood beside him, not smiling, not scowling, just present. She introduced him not as a monster, but as a man who had been judged, truly judged, and now had to carry that weight in the most human way possible, by speaking. Because Earth's twist was this. Vexar would not be hidden. He would not be erased. He would tour the stars, speaking only one story, the truth. Every system he once scarred would now see him again, not as a conqueror, but as a witness. He would visit ruins, orphan wards, war museums. He would answer questions from children. He would sit across from survivors. He would never deny, never excuse, only explain, only remember. It wasn't exile. It was atonement, live-streamed, interpreted, permanent. The Council lost their minds. You're turning him into a reality show, one envoy shrieked. No, Earth replied. We're turning him into history. And it worked. Vexar's first speech on the shattered moon of Eldar, 9, was watched by 14 billion sentients. He opened by saying, I used to call this place strategic terrain. Now I know it was home. Crowds wept. Critics fumed. Schools began adding the trial to their curricula. Some called it propaganda. Others called it progress. But the strangest thing? Vexar changed. Not suddenly, not conveniently, but piece by piece. He never asked for forgiveness. Never claimed redemption. He just kept speaking, kept remembering. Because Earth had done the unthinkable. They turned justice into a lifelong responsibility. Not a death, not a prison, a mirror. And in that mirror, the galaxy saw itself. Ugly, noble, confused, but trying. When the final broadcast of the Earth Tribunal ended, the screen faded not to black, but to a single line of text. Justice is not vengeance. It's the choice to build something better with eyes wide open. The council fell silent. No votes. No threats. Just awe. Because somehow, the smallest planet in the Confederation had just taught the stars what it meant to be human. And it didn't look like war. It looked like a man, telling the truth. Over and over. Forever.